Hello and welcome to the Australian Bitcoin podcast. In today's show, I will be talking about NFTs and Ordinals. I will discuss what are NFTs, the history of NFTs, the motivation for Ordinals, how Ordinals work and how they compare to Ethereum NFTs, the criticism of NFTs and Ordinals, and the argument for them, as well as how to get started if you don't want to go down the dark path of Ordinals. I said dark path because you might be aware that Ordinals has been a pretty hot topic in the last few months on Bitcoin Twitter. And by the way, I am recording this at the start of March. It's 9th of March now, 2023. So it has been a hot topic on Twitter, and people are debating if Ordinals and NFTs on Bitcoin are they a good thing. Some people think it's great, and some people think it's a spam attack on Bitcoin. So maybe this show can help you get to the bottom of it. So I've been doing quite a bit of research on this topic for the last few weeks. I created some Ordinals inscriptions, so if you think Ordinals are evil, don't shoot me. It was just for educational purposes. It was a very small inscription. It was just text. But anyway, in this show, I'm doing it a bit different format than most other Bitcoin shows. Most Bitcoin shows are interviews. They're an interview format. And they're great, but I think there's a lot of Bitcoin interview format shows. So I'm trying to do something different, and this is kind of my experiment with it. We just want to do more of a explanation topic by myself, and I think by doing that I can present the information in a more structured and concise way to give you, the listener, value and save your time. But it is actually harder to do the shows. I found it harder to do a show like this than an interview format. So an interview format, it's kind of easy because you just invite some guest. The guest is the expert, and you just ask him some questions and he does the work for you. And it's easy you just have a conversation. But with this kind of format, I have to do a lot of preparation in terms of research on the topic, and also I have to think how I structure the conversation. It's not easy just talking to the microphone. I have a lot more respect for people who do it. Apparently, Alex Jones in the United States, he does like 10 hours per day or something ridiculous each day, just going on monologues and rants. And it's, wow, that's actually a lot of skill and talent. But anyway, so yeah, I'm doing this new format and I'm trying it. So if you do like it or you don't like it, whichever way, I'd be very happy if you tell me what you think. You can contact me on Twitter or my email, danielw@hardblock.com.au. Tell me if you like it or you don't like it. Because it does actually take more time. So yeah, should I spend that time doing more shows like this? Anyway, I'll get on to the main content. But before that, I'll just read the sponsor. The best Bitcoin exchange in Australia, hardblock.com.au. We save your time and money with set and forget automated Bitcoin dollar cost averaging. Right from your bank to your cold storage device, we will help you with self-custody and encourage you to move your Bitcoin out. Okay, so what are NFTs anyway? So NFT stands for non-fungible token. Another term that I will use is digital artifacts. Digital artifacts is the ordinal version of the data that you put on the blockchain. There's Ordinals, which is the protocol where basically it's like NFTs on Bitcoin. There's also a term inscriptions. So ordinal inscriptions is the data you put on the Bitcoin blockchain. I guess you could interchange the term digital artifacts and inscriptions. But I'll explain more in the show. Okay, so NFT. What is an NFT? NFT is a token on the blockchain with data attached. The data associated to a token gives it additional value beyond the face value of a token. That token can be sent or sold to anyone by the owner of that token. So in common usage, the data is usually some kind of digital image which has some artistic value, like a JPEG, which some people would consider an art, like an artistic JPEG, an artistic digital image. The value, the worth, the financial worth of that data is arbitrary, and it's hard to assign. It depends, it's a kind of opinion, how much is a JPEG art worth. So you can't easily give it a specific value. So because of that, the actual token is non-fungible. Basically, one unit of that token is not equal to a different unit of the same token because they have different images attached, so they have different values. That's why it's considered non-fungible. So if the data itself, the actual image, that can be on the blockchain, or it can be a link or a hash of the data where the data is stored somewhere else. So, and when I say elsewhere, that can be a centralized data system like AWS or some distributed file system, but separate to the blockchain. And usually it's done that way because instead of putting the whole value, the whole data on the blockchain, if you just have a link to that data, you save space on the blockchain. And blockchain space is very scarce and expensive. So it's much cheaper and efficient to do things that way, to just have a link to the actual image and have the image stored on some server. So in common understanding of NFTs is that ownership of a token associated with some data gives you ownership of the data itself. But that is not really correct in any real way. Like if you're talking about data, JPEGs, JPEG art, that can be copied. The data is visible and accessible to anyone. The token simply the token that you do own, it simply points at that publicly visible image. The image never really moves itself when you send the token. So this kind of idea of ownership, it's not really true. You could have a separate law contract or copyright contract that specifies that owning a token gives some special ownership or rights over that NFT. But that is something done and enforced by lawyers and courtrooms outside of a blockchain. That's not the blockchain enforcing that ownership. In that situation, really the only benefit of a blockchain is to track the ownership of that data because whoever because you can track the ownership of a token. Blockchain does give the ownership of a token because only the token owner has the secret keys that can send the token wherever he wants. So he has actual real practical ownership of a token. He can only send it somewhere, but he doesn't have any real practical ownership of the image. So there was a case of something like this, which apparently happened somewhat recently, where apparently Eminem had some sample of his music as an NFT, but apparently he had some separate copyright contract that specifies the owner of that NFT token actually has rights to that music. So normally if Eminem creates music, a different artist can't sample it and use that without permission from Eminem, right? But there was a contract specifying the owner of an NFT token has rights to do whatever he wants with that music, and apparently some rival hip-hop artist bought that token, and he could then use the music. And supposedly Eminem was not happy, and because it was some kind of rival where they didn't like each other, and they fought in court. I'm not sure what the result is, to be honest, of that courtroom, and I'm not even sure if how real this is, because I find it sounds to me like it just might have been set up in a bit of a publicity and marketing stunt. You know how these hip-hop people, they like to have these feuds for promotion purposes. But anyway, supposedly that happened. But to highlight, the most important thing is blockchains allow tracking of an ownership of a token associated with an image, but cannot enforce ownership of that data. But blockchains don't do that. You are just buying really a pointer at a public image, not the image itself, and you can have as many pointers pointing to as many images as you want. You're not really buying much. When somebody buys an NFT, they need to be aware of that. So for that reason, I personally don't use NFTs as investments, and I'm skeptical of them as being a great financial long-term investment or store of value. I believe it's something you can have fun with, and there's some other benefits, but if your goal is a financial return, I don't think NFTs are the best thing for that. You're better off just buying and holding Bitcoin. And that misconception about ownership also causes a lot of negative reaction from Bitcoiners to that NFT concept, because we can see that people are a bit misled, thinking they own some image. They don't understand what's actually happening there. And there's a lot of scammers who take advantage of people's naivety. And certainly a lot of people bought NFTs in the last bull run, and a lot of those NFTs just crashed. I mean, everything crashed. You know, again, will we recover? I'm skeptical of it being a great financial investment. You know, in fact, I had an idea. What would be cool is just to create an NFT protocol for Bitcoin with off-chain data, a different like one than Ordinals, because Ordinals is on-chain, but create one with off-chain data and just copy over his Ethereum NFTs on to Bitcoin. Like everyone who is, you know, you think you own some monkey JPEG, just do it, have another NFT. You can create as many of them as you want, really. And like maybe it's gonna show those NFT owners how silly their concept of ownership is. And nobody can stop anyone doing that. But while I do make fun of the concept of NFTs a bit, I think there are some artists using it who are actually passionate about the digital art that they create, or whatever art it is they create, and they're passionate about their work, and they don't have really a sophisticated understanding of how NFTs work behind the scenes, but they're just using it and fulfills a purpose for them, and that purpose is to monetize the art that they feel is art and that they feel passionate about. And they're doing that successfully. So there's some utility for them, for those artists. And there's people sometimes who like some of that art and just want to support that artist. And that NFT system is a way for them to give money to such an artist. So if there is some kind of genuine use case there hidden among the stupid images of monkeys. Okay, the history of NFTs. I like history. I think knowing history, whatever it is, it helps give you some context to understanding the situation. So I'll briefly explain. So NFTs actually began on Bitcoin. Most people are not aware of that because they're much more popular on Ethereum in the last few years. But they began on Bitcoin. More specifically, they began on Counterparty, which is a smart contract platform on top of Bitcoin. Counterparty has its own token. It still exists. Counterparty was released in 2013 and used a Bitcoin script operation called opreturn. So that illustrates that NFTs on Bitcoin are not really a new thing, and it shows that they can't really be stopped. This was already happening before, and this was already possible before. When Counterparty came out, it was actually the same debate that we are having now, with many of the same people like Louis Dash Jr., for people who know him. I mean, it's really pretty much literally the same arguments. You can look them up. So this is an old debate in many ways. It just came to the forefront again. But some of you might have heard of Rare Pepes. So your Rare Pepes, they came out in September 2016. And they were really the first really popular NFT. So for those of you who don't know, Rare Pepes is just, they were a collection of images of Pepe the Frog in different settings. And Rare Pepes were on Counterparty. Following that, NFTs mostly took off on the Ethereum network. And I think, I'm not sure why they moved. Well, I think I have some ideas, but I'm not going to speculate because, I don't want to go into speculation. I'm here to spit facts for you. But anyway, they moved mostly onto Ethereum. I think partially it was because Counterparty was a very early protocol. It was designed for financial token issuance, as opposed to something like Ordinals now, which is purpose-built for NFTs / digital artifacts / inscriptions. So another aspect of Ordinals is something the creator calls ordinal theory, which is basically the numbering scheme of individual satoshis. I'll explain a little bit more later, but that's not new either. In fact, it was posted on Bitcoin Talk in 2012 by a Bitcoin code developer. And that code developer basically pretty much came up with something. Again, that term NFT wasn't used, and he was thinking more as for financial assets like stocks. But basically, he used that numbering scheme to create with something very similar to what Ordinals is now. During the last few years, NFTs became very popular. People have been collecting them, showing off their collections. When I say collecting, it's a public image, but so it's you own collect the tokens which point to the public image, but people say they own that token, so I've collected them and I owe them, and anyway. So, but yeah, people have been collecting them and buying them and making them and having these kind of virtual art galleries. But since that peak of bit of a Bitcoin and crypto hype cycle in 2021, the NFT market has crashed very heavily. I heard one report recently where some NFT marketplace, the volume dropped around 99% from its peak. What was the motivation for creating NFTs? Over the past few weeks, I listened to a lot of interviews by the creator of Ordinals. What was the motivation for creating Ordinals? I think that's how I should introduce the topic. But yeah, I had many discussions and interviews with him. His name is Casey Rodarmore. And Casey is a long-time Bitcoiner. Since around 2014, he's a Bitcoin maxi. He values some of his ethos of Bitcoin, things like freedom and independence from government and increasing people's freedom and self-sovereignty. He's also a very smart and technical guy. He understands Bitcoin very well, technically and the other aspects. Before the Ordinals, he was looking at NFTs on Ethereum, and most of that art he didn't like. But he says that he saw a few specific instances of art that he did really like. And it was very similar to the type of art that he as a hobbyist created. And he saw people making that art and artists getting financial return for that and being supported by people who liked that art. And he wanted to actually be part of that. He wanted to bring that to Bitcoin. He wanted to use NFTs on Bitcoin because Bitcoin is better, and he didn't want to use a shitcoin like Ethereum. And Bitcoin, why is Bitcoin better? This isn't the podcast for that, but basically it's more anti-fragile and decentralized. So he also wanted technically unsophisticated people who landed on Ethereum to land on Bitcoin instead, so that they learn about Bitcoin and learn about the Bitcoin ecosystem rather than getting into Ethereum and getting into the shitcoin world. Also, the way he created inscriptions, he purposely made it so that you can't create an inscription without running a Bitcoin full node. So Bitcoin full node is something that we encourage people to do. It's better. And he wanted people to encourage people to run Bitcoin full nodes. So that's how he created inscriptions initially. Although, if it becomes popular, and I think it might, that's very easy to change, and which isn't necessarily a bad thing. Yeah, that's how he created the initial versions. He required people to run Bitcoin full nodes, even though it would probably make it harder and slow adoption of his protocol. So that's something that's worth considering. What are ordinals? Well, the shortest description is ordinals are NFTs on Bitcoin. The protocol is very simple in many ways. It has a similar design philosophy to Bitcoin itself, in that it is simple, so a lot of unnecessary options are not provided and taken away. Ordinals was made easier by the Taproot upgrade in Bitcoin. Taproot was an upgrade to Bitcoin 2 years ago, which allowed transaction types with more efficient scripting. There was also an upgrade recently which removed the individual transaction limit per transaction. So there's still a Bitcoin blockchain limit. That's 4 megabytes. So you can only have 4 megabytes worth of transactions but now you can have one very big transaction. Somebody made a transaction of basically 4 megabytes. So if in the whole block there was just one transaction, when normally there would be thousands of transactions. So if it was that limit of per transaction limit was removed recently. But Taproot and that change doesn't itself enable Ordinals. It just makes Ordinals easier, because even with that transaction size limit and without Taproot, it was still possible to do NFTs and Ordinals. And in fact, they were done. NFTs were already done, like Pepe the Frog, Repepes. So they were already done. Taproot didn't enable it. It's just made it easier to do. And you can't really remove that also, because, I mean, you can, but voice changes to remove to Taproot, there's a lot of benefits to Bitcoin, and removing that transaction size limit, it was also had a purpose to enable many financial use cases of Bitcoin. So if you're gonna change that, you'll be removing legitimate use cases. Ordinals, the ordinal data is stored in a Taproot script. You don't have to understand what that means. If you don't understand it, don't worry about it. It basically means that the data for Ordinals is stored on-chain, on the Bitcoin blockchain itself. Ordinals do not point, it's not a pointer to an image stored on a centralized server. The image itself, the whole JPEG, is stored on Bitcoin blockchain. That's how Ordinals work. So it uses individual Satoshis to link to the data. Satoshi, for those who don't know, it's the smallest unit of Bitcoin. It's basically 0.70 is 1 Bitcoin. So Bitcoin itself does not track Satoshis. Bitcoin transactions have inputs and outputs, and those inputs and outputs have just an amount of Satoshis. Like they might have 10,000 Satoshi input, 5,000 Satoshi output, but it doesn't track what individual Satoshi, which individual Satoshi is which. Bitcoin doesn't do that. So what Casey done, he added a layer above Bitcoin that assigns this kind of numbering scheme to those inputs and outputs, to those Satoshis. It's basically like a first in, first out numbering scheme. And that's done using that protocol, the Ordinals protocol, and it's not Bitcoin itself. It's basically like a layer 2 protocol on top of Bitcoin. You can think of it as a lens to see Bitcoin through. So now you can track those individual Satoshis using the Ordinals protocol, and so you can put data on the blockchain. So you link the Ordinals, the Satoshis to that data, and you can really have arbitrary assets such as NFTs, security tokens, accounts, stablecoins can be attached to Ordinal Satoshis. Casey prefers the term digital artifacts to NFTs. Ordinal inscriptions can also be used. So ordinal inscriptions can only be immutable, unlike Ethereum inscriptions, hence the term digital artifacts. So I think what he's trying to convey is the idea that you put something on Bitcoin, it's going to stay there forever, for time immemorial. So it's kind of like a digital artifact. That's why he, I think, likes the term. And it's also more a broader term than NFTs. So digital artifact can be anything digital, really. I'll do some comparisons of Ordinals to Ethereum NFTs. So this is kind of based on FIQ on Ordinals website, or as I like to say, fuck you. So from that FIQ, I'll list some of the differences that Casey provides, and I'll add some of my own comments to it also. So obviously the big difference is that with Ordinals the data is on-chain. With Ethereum, it's usually not. Usually you have a pointer. Having said that, I'll add that this is kind of like a convention thing, because you can put any kind of data as an ordinal, and the data you put in there could be a link. Nothing's stopping that. So in fact, I think NFTs, kind of going away from ordinals specifically, with NFTs as a concept, I think NFTs will stay here in some form or another, and I think a lot of them will have data off-chain. There might be a different type of Ordinals protocol and different implementation of NFTs on Bitcoin with data off-chain, because ultimately Bitcoin on-chain data is on-chain data space, it's very precious and very scarce and expensive. So he also mentions inscriptions, ordinal inscriptions are always immutable. Ethereum inscriptions can be immutable, but are not always. It depends on the smart contract code, and it's not always clear if an individual Ethereum NFT is immutable or not. He also says that ordinal NFTs are cheaper, but that's kind of a temporary thing. It's not really fundamental to the protocol, and if ordinals become more popular, it's going to become more expensive. Ordinals do not have on-chain royalties, while Ethereum does. So on-chain royalties is if basically whenever a ordinal NFT is bought and sold, the original creator gets a percentage from that transaction. So that's what how royalties work. But I agree with Casey that it's not really that important, and it just complicates things and does not do much. On-chain royalty system on Ethereum, it's plagued with problems, and it doesn't really give the artist more money. It's really just a difference as the artist gets paid the money up front or slowly over time through the royalties. Because when the artist creates that NFT, if there's on-chain royalties that go with it, then the person buying it isn't going to pay as much, because when he sells it, he won't be able to get as much because there will always be a cut in the transaction. So that's what it does. It doesn't give the artist more money if there's royalties. It just means he gets the money later. And it's probably better for an artist to get the money up front, actually. Casey also claims that Ordinals is simpler, scarcer, and more secure with a richer data model than Ethereum NFTs. And maybe that's probably true. I think a lot of these things are somewhat implementation specific, so I don't want to dwell too much on them, because I'm interested in the bigger picture of the concept of NFTs and ordinals and what's the value there. And in terms of the big picture, the obvious big difference, the big fundamental difference and big damn benefit is that ordinals are on Bitcoin, not on Ethereum. That's the big thing. And to understand what the benefit of that is, I'll explain that a bit later in the show, but it's understanding what the benefits of Bitcoin and blockchain is and what NFTs actually do. But if you're using NFTs with the goal and value of tracking ownership of some token through a decentralized system, then the most decentralized system is Bitcoin. So you want to use Bitcoin for that. If your goal is to put the image somewhere because you want it to be available in a censorship-resistant way over a long period of time, then you would want to use Bitcoin or anything else, because Bitcoin, again, is the most decentralized and it's going to last the longest, has the chance of lasting the longest. If your goal is simply, you don't care about that, but you just simply want to monetize your art, then Bitcoin is probably the best currency for you to use, because Bitcoin has the biggest adoption out of all the cryptocurrencies. So I guess one possible disadvantage of using Bitcoin for NFTs is that right now the Ordinal system is not as developed on Bitcoin, but ecosystem. But that's not really a hard problem to solve, because as it becomes more popular, it would become, the ecosystem would evolve, and already there's a lot of trading going on already of ordinal NFTs. There has been a lot of criticism of Ordinals from Bitcoiners. Most Bitcoiners seem to be against it, at least on Twitter, although that might not be representative. Bitcoiners have called it spam. The Ordinals inscription, they call it spam on the Bitcoin blockchain, an attack on Bitcoin, and they use that kind of pretty strong language. So I'll try to explain the arguments against Ordinals. I think the main argument against it, and why people don't like it, is that inefficient design. Before I mentioned that Ordinal inscriptions are cheaper than NFTs on Ethereum, and a big part of that reason is because Bitcoin devs have put a lot of effort trying to optimize the Bitcoin network to make transactions as small as possible, to make them take as little as spice as possible. That was part of the Taproot upgrade. So you'd have scripts which take less spice, and we're trying to save every little byte of data to keep the Bitcoin blockchain as small as possible, to keep it decentralized. And then somebody like Casey comes along and creates something on Ordinals where people just dump whole JPEGs on the Bitcoin blockchain, and people are dumping JPEGs of whatever images of dick pics or whatever it is, and some people are shocked by that, and that's not what they wanted to happen. So that's kind of why people are calling it a spam and an attack on Bitcoin. Really, the main thing is most devs are not opposed to the concept of NFTs. They're all right with that. But they really don't like the idea of the data just being on-chain like that. I think that's the main argument. They see just dumping on-chain data as unnecessary and wasteful. They think it's much better to just simply have a link or reference to off-chain image, and that they believe that's all that is needed. That's definitely a valid point, and it's probably the most important criticism. If Ordinals don't gain tractions, this could probably be the biggest reason why it doesn't. Because it's just inefficient, and that inefficiency, it's not that you just spam your blockchain, it means Ordinal inscriptions are much more expensive because you have to pay for the data you use. So if you have a bigger transaction that uses more data, which Ordinal transactions obviously are, that becomes much more expensive. Possible that Ordinal inscriptions will be prohibitively expensive in the future, and this would die. But even in that case, an alternate version of NFTs could be done with the data off-chain. That's not hard. I think another argument is that it's an attack on fungibility. That's an argument I've heard, because now you have the individual Satoshi, and one individual Satoshi is not equal to the value of another individual Satoshi. And people say that Bitcoin needs to be fungible, that one unit needs to be equal to another unit for it to function well as money. And I do believe fungibility is important. But I think what matters is the fungibility in practice. What we're really talking about is one tiny Satoshi. It's an insignificant amount of money. And in some ways, you could already say that Bitcoin is not completely fungible. There's things like Bitcoins which are obtained from miners, or that have not been, that people bought without KYC. Was actually more important, like often valued more. Like Bitcoins bought from miners, like there's no history to them. So some people have valued that. Also, if there's if some Bitcoins have a lot of inputs to it, then sending that transaction would be more expensive. So if there's already some kind of fungibility issues, so I guess I would say that fungibility, it's already not perfect, and it is, strictly speaking, lowers Bitcoin's fungibility, but it doesn't really do much to attack fungibility in a practical sense, because we're just talking about individual Satoshis. Another argument that I've heard, and this is kind of related to what I already mentioned, some people just believe that Bitcoin, it's freedom money and not for stupid JPEGs and of dick pics or whatever people are doing on there. Okay, I'm joking with the dick pics, but people have put that on there using Ordinals, but people do other images. Some people believe Bitcoin is freedom money. It's meant to be only for financial transactions and not for things like that, for putting JPEGs on. Another argument against Ordinals that I heard is that people would use it to put things like child porn on the blockchain, and therefore the government would go after Bitcoin because it contains child porn. Having said that, that's actually, look, there's already actually child porn. There's links to child porn on the blockchain. People do done that already. People put links to child porn and other kind of bad things in Bitcoin, because again, you could put that on Bitcoin already. So these things already exist. And for voice people who don't like Ordinals, if you want to voice Ordinal disrespecters, then in some ways, Ordinals is very easy to stop. In one way, in one perspective, it can't be stopped at all, but in another perspective, it's easy. I'll try and explain. So strictly speaking, you can't stop Ordinals on Bitcoin. You can make it, like I said, you can only make it harder, because ultimately you can't control what the data people can put on the blockchain. Bitcoin is permissionless and uncensorable. You can just make it harder by reducing transaction limits and things like that. But even in that case, you would just restrict legitimate financial transactions. And the fact that it can't be stopped is a good thing, I believe, because it's proof of Bitcoin's decentralization and permissionless. A lot of people involved in Bitcoin don't like it, but they can't stop it. I think there's some value in that. It shows that the Bitcoin devs and whatever is, nobody controls Bitcoin. On the other hand, another bit inscriptions are actually easy to stop in a kind of in a different sense. Like I said, they can be strictly stopped, but inscriptions are very inefficient because they take up so much block size. One image that might take, 1 megabyte, that'd be like a quarter of a block of a Bitcoin block. In that 1 megabyte, you could have thousands of transactions moving billions of dollars of value. And that one image would have to pay the same transaction fee as those thousands of transactions moving billions of dollars of value added up together in a market for block space. It's very easy to outcompete ordinal inscriptions using financial transactions. So for somebody who doesn't like inscriptions, really your best bet to stop it is to build and promote the use of Bitcoin and Lightning as a financial platform. And when you do that, you crowd out ordinal inscriptions. This is the easiest way to stop it. Basically, the way to stop ordinals is to ignore it and carry on building Bitcoin as the best money that there is. I'll try and present the case for ordinals now. Earlier in the show, I said it's there, but to understand it, you have to understand what a blockchain is, its purpose and cons and pros. Because right now, a lot of people use the term blockchain because it's a buzzword, but they don't really understand it. I'll repeat again what I said before, that the key thing is putting data on the blockchain does not give ownership. It's actually 100 degrees the opposite. Blockchain is a public, uncensorable time chain available to anyone for all posterity. It is putting it in the public commons. When you put on the blockchain, you put it in the public commons for all to own. It's like giving it to the world. It's like putting graffiti on the moon, some kind of art graffiti on the moon for everybody to see, but then saying it's mine. It's not yours, it's everybody can view it. That's the benefit of blockchain. And when you put on the blockchain, to be there available for people for a long time, because people expect Bitcoin to be around for centuries. Bitcoin is the chain most likely to stand the test of time. So while you don't own that data, that is actually very valuable to have something there publicly for everybody to see and access. That is valuable. On an episode of Citadel Dispatch, which is a Bitcoin podcast, Matt Odell, who was skeptical and anti-ordinals, but he accepted things like 3D printed gun schematics. He thought that was a genuine and good use to put 3D printed gun schematics on the Bitcoin blockchain. So, art is a mode of speech, just like 3D printed gun schematics. And art can be more profound than guns. It can influence people, it can cause emotional thoughts, it can convey information that art can convey information that you can't easily convey using words. So it can be just as important as gun schematics. I don't understand how, if putting gun schematics is okay, how is not putting some JPEG which might be meaningful to somebody not okay? It doesn't make sense to me. In fact, Satoshi himself inscribed data on the blockchain. So does that mean he was a spammer exploiting Bitcoin? Most NFTs images are stupid, but they can be profound. It's like anything. I can, write "suck my hairy balls," or I can send financial transactions that are very important. I can use a transaction to bribe a police officer, or I can donate money to a family in a war zone using Bitcoin. So that is one transaction spam or not. If I'm bribing a cop, that's not a good use case of Bitcoin. But Bitcoin does not discriminate. It doesn't discriminate if you're using it for good use or whether it's valuable or not. If you pay the fee, it's in. So if you value something enough to put it on the Bitcoin blockchain, then I don't see why you can't. If that's something important to you, to get your data preserved for humanity on a chain that will stand the test of time. But also, I feel meaning and opinions and moral judgments are somewhat irrelevant then to this. It's a waste of time. I feel the only thing that's important is what can be done and what can't be done. Bitcoin is permissionless and uncensorable and content neutral. It does not see or judge or make any moral judgment on the transactions it carries. And yes, you can put data off-chain, and I believe a lot of NFTs will move that way with data on-chain, off-chain, sorry. Data off-chain is much cheaper, but there is a downside to that. You're putting it on some different, less reliable medium. So if it's valuable for you, for that data, that NFT image to be accessible far into the future, you're much better off having it on the Bitcoin blockchain as an ordinal than having it off-chain where you don't know what's going to happen to it. It's going to be preserved on the Bitcoin blockchain. But if that's not important, then if you just want to track ownership of some image, then yeah, for those use cases, you don't need it on-chain, and NFT with off-chain data is all that's needed. I think both have a use case. And I suppose some people could make the argument that you can store data off-chain easier if you want to preserve it in an uncensorable medium, but there's other ways to do that, but it's easy, and that could be true. But another thing that by putting it on the Bitcoin blockchain, another thing that you're doing to that data, you're not only preserving it, you're saying it's worth paying attention to. In today's world, there's a lot of data, there's a lot of images, but it's very easy to create stuff, but we only have limited attention. By putting it on a blockchain, an uncensorable medium like that, where you're paying to put it in, even if it's expensive, you're saying that you think this is important enough to go on the Bitcoin blockchain, and you're paying the fees for that. So you're saying that you think this is worth paying attention to. Okay, but that's about storing data on the blockchain. The other aspect of NFTs is you can kind of sell and trade that token related to that image. You can transfer ownership of it. Well, you can transfer ownership of a token, but like I discussed, it doesn't transfer ownership of the image. But people are doing it. And what's happening there is really the way people are using it. For the artist, it's obvious. They create the token and they just want to monetize the art. They create an art with a token related to it, and they just want to get paid for the art. That's the use for them. But for the buyer, one, it is partly could be an altruistic reason of a way to support the artist. But another thing that it does is that, but if you want to just support the artist, they can provide a Bitcoin address and you can just give them Bitcoin, right? You don't need an NFT token to just support the artist. But another thing, I think what's happening is, for many people, it's buying status. and prestige by supporting that artist. It's by having that token related to that art. When you buy that token, you're buying status. That's what people are doing. Like people are showing off the NFTs they own. Hard using that word own. I need to use some other terminology. I think the terminology of owning an NFT image, it's not correct, but I'll use it because I can't think of anything else. But yeah, people have those NFT images. The owners are just really showing their status. It's a status symbol. And that status is in some way transferable, right? So there's an artist, I support that artist by buying that token from him, but when I'm down on hard times and I can sell that token, and I'm selling that kind of status of that token of the person supporting that artist, right? That goes to somebody else. And there's a long history of this kind of patronage system in art, and that's usually what it was about. If I look up the term patronage in Wikipedia, this is a section that I get there. I'll read it out. Rulers, nobles, and very wealthy people use patronage of arts to endorse their political ambitions, social positions, and prestige. That is, patrons operated as sponsors. Some patrons, such as the Medici family of Florence, used artistic patronage to cleanse wealth that was perceived as ill-gotten through usury. Art patronage was especially important in the creation of religious art. So I think that's what a lot of what is happening in NFT space. It's just about buying status. And like I said, I don't think that's necessarily, good financial. It's about a financial return, and you shouldn't expect a financial return. And even now, like this guy says, why does a rich philanthropist in New York sponsor some kind of art exhibition? And it's to gain access to those art halls, right? You get access to you sponsor the art exhibition, you sponsor the artist, and you get access to all those girls who like to go to the art gallery, and you get kind of that status among them, right? That's a lot what art is about. It's also about laundering money, but that's a different thing. So yeah, when you own ownership of an NFT is verifiable proof of your patronage of a creator. And the actual expense and prestige of putting it on the Bitcoin blockchain, that kind of wasteful, inefficient way that Ordinals is intentionally created kind of plays into it, because opulence is always part of art and patronage, but what kind of gives the prestige when you spend money in a kind of a bit wasteful way. It's like, why do people buy Ferraris, an expensive watch? It's not really practical or efficient use of money. A Ferrari is in a very practical, comfortable, efficient car. It's just status. It's inefficient, and you're showing off that you can have enough money to spend inefficiently like that. So I think that's kind of in some ways what NFTs are. It's status to have art on the Bitcoin blockchain, and it's status to support that. The Bitcoin blockchain is the gold standard of cryptocurrency. So yeah. And addressing the child porn on the blockchain argument, like the other arguments, okay, somewhat valid. This one, I don't think it's a valid argument at all. Like I said, there is already child porn and things like that on the Bitcoin blockchain, so Ordinals doesn't really change that. And Casey actually makes a really good point that usually there's much stronger protections for freedom of speech than for financial transactions. It's most countries it's very hard for the government to remove somebody's freedom of speech, close down media, but taking down or shutting down or banning a financial instrument is perfectly normal. So by tying Bitcoin into not just a platform for financial transactions, but making it also a platform for speech. So it's a financial platform and a platform for speech. By mixing these things, it makes it much more complicated for governments to try and attack and shut down Bitcoin, because now they're not just shutting down a financial product, which they can do. Now they're attacking freedom of speech, which legally is much harder for them to get around. I also think it's kind of a bit of a cacked argument. The idea is we shouldn't put data on the blockchain because the government might come after us and attack us. Yeah, it's a cacked argument. Bitcoin is designed to survive under the assumption of a hostile government. And Bitcoin doesn't rely on the mercy of government. If it's vulnerable to some kind of government attack, instead of cowering and not doing stuff to upset governments, what we need to do is to make Bitcoin less vulnerable to attacks and banning of government. That's the solution, not just hope for mercy. Okay, so let's say you do want to join the dark side and start making ordinal inscriptions. How do you get started? Well, it's actually pretty easy. You can go to docs.ordinals.com and there's a guide there. Like I said, ordinals is actually pretty simple, so it's not hard to do ordinals, to make inscriptions, with the exception that you need to have a full node. So that's kind of one of the requirements. That will probably change in the future, but right now the Ord wallet, it needs to be on a full node. So basically, I'm not going to tell you how to set up a Bitcoin full node. There's other guides for that. But once you have a full node, you need to go into the terminal and basically just install Ord. It's there's like 2 lines on the documentation. It shows you there. And basically you have your file and you go Ord wallet inscribe and that file. That's all you need to do. And we get 2 transactions which get broadcast onto the Bitcoin blockchain, and that's basically it. You have your Ord, so it's very easy to do. It's a pretty simple protocol. There's a Discord server that can help you, where it's pretty active, and you can buy and sell ordinals from people, and you can ask questions and ask for help. To sum up, ordinals can be a way to create and support creators using that Ordinals NFT system. But you shouldn't get into Ordinals or NFTs seeking financial return. Do it because you want to support creators or because you want to have fun. But if you're looking for financial return, better just to stick with Bitcoin. Ordinals have taken off, but likely they will be very rare in the future because Bitcoin block size is so expensive and scarce. It's likely that there will be an NFT system on Bitcoin with off-chain data. And whether you think whether you think ordinals are good or not, I think we have to understand that Bitcoin is immutable, and we have to adjust our expectations to Bitcoin and to how it gets used, and Bitcoin does not adjust for us. If we think Bitcoin was supposed to be used in one way or something, we had some expectation. It's not Bitcoin that's wrong, it's us that is wrong. And this kind of happened in 2015-16 with the big blockers. The people wanted to raise the Bitcoin block size because they had this expectation that Bitcoin is supposed to be used as cash and for transaction values. And they wanted to and they wanted to change Bitcoin. They wanted to change Bitcoin to meet their kind of expectations of what it's supposed to be. But it doesn't work that way. The big blockers were wrong. It wasn't Bitcoin that was wrong. And the same thing, I believe, is applicable here. I will also say that when I got into Bitcoin, it was always said, but if there is something worthwhile on the altcoins, it can simply be copied onto Bitcoin. And that's why Bitcoin is valuable and better than all of them. And I agree with that. And that's why one of the reasons why that's probably the biggest reason why I recommend people to just invest in Bitcoin. Because Bitcoin can do everything that altcoins can do. You can recreate Ethereum on Bitcoin. You can, if you want NFTs, you can have them on Bitcoin, and everything is better on Bitcoin than it is on altcoins because Bitcoin is more decentralized, has bigger network effects, and is more secure. And so I think if that's happening, if some people have started using NFTs and if that's become a utility for them, why not? Let's go. Let's take it for ourselves and let's copy it onto Bitcoin and let's get those people to use NFTs on Bitcoin. So I would say it's time to bribe the shitcoiners for that small sliver of value that they did create and take it for ourselves and for Bitcoin for the win. So shitcoins, in my opinion, will always be poor experimental field tests for Bitcoin and the field tested NFTs. And now we're going to take NFTs for ourselves. Thank you very much.